I wrong for pretending not to know my fiance after she had a meltdown during boarding the plane and was eventually thrown off? I imagine I'm going to get raked over the coals for this one. So, my fiance, maybe not for much longer, and I were on our way back from a vacation recently. It was a great time and everything went off without an issue. That is, until we started boarding the plane. Now I know better. I only bring a small backpack with essentials in case I don't get my checked bags. I can survive out of this backpack and it will always pass baggage check for size and weight. I've done a lot of traveling, so why fight the system? My fiance didn't want to listen to my advice and chose to bring basically a regular full-size bag that barely fits the standards of a carry-on. But generally speaking, the airline worker doesn't want to deal with the trouble and allows it through. But this time, the airline worker was not having it. It was a packed flight, we were boarding last in economy, and it was just a shit show. I got through just fine first with my little backpack, but I could hear the argument from the boarding tunnel thing and it was getting heated. I was about to go back and try to smooth it out, but my fiance rushed past and just boarded the plane. I assumed, not having heard it super clearly, that the attendant had given in and let her on. That was not the case. So we found our seats and settled in. I was pretty tired and I could tell she was upset, so I kind of just tucked into the window and put my hat down and tried to take a nap. But soon after, the airline worker and a cop shows up and they are not fucking around and want her off the plane. She tries to plead and cry, etc., but they are not having it. And maybe in a moment of panic or just plain self-preservation, the cop asks if we're together and I blurt out, "No," shaking my head empathetically. I got kill daggers from her eyes and she shot up and grabbed her bag and followed the cop out. She was also swearing and screaming the whole way out. Now, obviously, this is well after the event I'm posting this, but when she did eventually get home, she caught the next flight out with the bag checked. I was there to pick her up. She obviously thought I was the asshole, and to be honest, almost everyone I know thinks I'm an asshole except my boss and coworkers, who for context were very much relying on me to get back on time, which I gave my word I would for a really important project that was time sensitive. They were all very happy I didn't get thrown off too. So am I the asshole for this self-preservation? The most disturbing patient I ever treated as a child psychologist is now training to become a surgeon. About 20 years ago, I was working as a child psychologist in a small town and had a 6-year-old patient referred to me for mandatory counseling by the school. Although I only worked with her for a few sessions, and this was years ago, she was probably the child who disturbed me the most to this day. She was originally referred for graphic pictures she drew in class of people being maimed or killed. She did not have exposure to violence or violent media at home, so these were entirely the product of her imagination. She was also somehow involved in an incident where another child was seriously hurt under unclear circumstances, but she could not be concretely tied to what happened. I found out that she had vivid fantasies of cutting living things open and at times had acted out on these fantasies on small animals. She told me freely like she was proud of it. She also tested at a college reading level at 6 years old. There were multiple times where she would say things that even took me a second to follow. That suggested both a quickness and a grasp of double meaning and a nuance that would be considered far beyond what was developmentally expected for her age. The parents were white-collar immigrants in a stable and supportive household, but there was clearly some culture barrier because they kept saying she was good because she was smart and tested high. They didn't seem to understand when I tried to explain that being good academically and being well-behaved or moral were not the same thing. Most disturbingly, I noticed they were intentionally or unintentionally teaching her masking behaviors to conceal these impulses to get what she wanted by manipulating others rather than putting herself at risk, without actually addressing the underlying problem. It becomes very hard to intervene on children who have learned these behaviors because they keep escalating while flying under the radar until they do something they can no longer get away with as older teens or adults and the legal system comes down on them. I strongly recommended both to the parents and the school that they should pursue further and more intensive counseling for their daughter than I could provide. At the time, I had a colleague who was piloting an inpatient program for intervening earlier or younger children with extremely destructive impulses who I gave them the contact for. The parents did not seem open to this at all and abruptly moved away before we had finished our sessions. A couple of years later, I also moved to a new city, but I always wondered what happened to her, fearing she had ended up in juvenile hall or worse, prison. Very recently, I caught up with some old colleagues and learned through happenstance that she was now in training to become a surgeon at an elite East Coast institution. When I found this out, I felt an immediate chill go through me. Someone in that position of trust with that level of intelligence and training has the potential to do a lot of harm, which might not be discovered for years, if ever. Part of me, I am ashamed to admit, even felt that this was a worse outcome. I feel guilty for having these feelings at all because they do not accord with my values or training as a professional. I strongly believe that people are not at fault for their mental health problems or personality disorders. Such people are far more likely to become the victims of crimes than perpetrators, and I certainly do not believe that anyone should be punished or precluded from certain careers because of a perceived predisposition to crime, particularly as a child. I have also had to work hard to undo a lot of the biases that my professors passed on to me in graduate school decades ago that are not based in evidence, such as some people are born psychopaths, a term we no longer use, and are destined to hurt people. I want with every fiber of my being to believe that she received treatment and eventually realized a calling to help people. I want to believe that, but there's a feeling I can't quite escape. Am I wrong for not attending the engagement dinner my future in-laws threw for me after my fiance hid my engagement ring? My fiance, 31 male, proposed to me, 28 female, days ago. He has this habit of joking around and pulling pranks from time to time. It bothers me sometimes, but I try to have patience. His family wanted to throw us an engagement party at a restaurant. I heard his mom talk about how expensive this place was and how much money they paid for reservations, so this clearly was a huge deal for them. My fiance and I were getting ready, and I noticed my engagement ring wasn't where I left it before I entered the shower. I freaked out and looked for it everywhere. I asked my fiance about it, and he said he didn't see it. I freaked out and was running out of time for the party. He sat there watching me, almost losing my mind trying to find it, to the point where I started crying because without the ring, I couldn't show up to the party. I kept thinking about what his family would say and how they think I was irresponsible to lose the ring that is somewhat expensive. I gave up looking and sat down and just cried in frustration. Next thing I knew, my fiance was standing in front of me laughing with his hand extended to me with the ring in it. I asked where he found it and he could barely speak and say that he hid it from me last minute before the party as a prank. I was in shock, but I just sort of blew up on him and started yelling, saying that he hid the ring, made me freak out for 2 hours and almost made me miss the party. He was like, "Relax, it was a prank, okay? Don't make a big deal out of it and ruin the evening." I told him I wasn't going to the party and that if his family asked, I would tell them it was because he hid my ring. He freaked out and started begging me to let it go and just go with him, but I refused and went into the bathroom, took my medication, and stayed there. He lost it and kept saying that I blew this out of proportion and that I ruined my own party and cost his family a lot of money and disrespected them by not attending. His family found out and they were mad at him, but also me for choosing to not attend and getting over it, but I was in a horrible state emotionally and couldn't handle being in public after what had happened. So, am I the asshole for choosing not to go after he hid the ring? Am I wrong for not letting my daughter spend her college fund on a house or a wedding? Backstory: I, 43 female, have 4 kids and I'm currently pregnant. My husband and I, 50 male, started adding to college funds every month for each of our kids pretty much as soon as we found out we were pregnant. I won't say the exact amount, but my husband has an excellent job, so it's more than most. We never told our kids because it just didn't feel necessary. My daughter Elle, 22 female, got pregnant when she was 16 and ended up dropping out of school. I was very disappointed, but I understood. However, I was under the impression she would return later, but she has no plans to. The dad stuck around, and now they have one more kid on the way. They are engaged but don't plan to marry until they can afford it. They were doing okay financially for a while, but due to the market right now, they've been struggling because Elle can't get a job since she doesn't have a diploma, so we've been loaning them money. My daughter Katie, 17 female, is a senior and just got accepted into college. We've been setting everything up, and obviously she knows about the fund now. Katie and Elle were talking, and she was telling Elle about the school, and Elle asked how she was planning on paying for it. Katie responded, "My college fund." I was in the room while they were talking, and this made me panic. We had just planned on splitting it between the remaining 4 since we knew they were going to college. Elle asked me if they all had one, and I wasn't going to lie, so I said yes. She got really excited and went to call her fiance and tell him the good news. I was confused and told her she couldn't have the money. She asked why, and I said it's for school. She got upset and left my house. The next day, I got a call from Elle, and she was crying and begging me to let her have the funds so she could finally afford a down payment and maybe even a wedding. I told her she could have the money if she went back to school, and whatever money was left over she could use for whatever she wanted. She got super mad and started yelling at me and saying it's her money. I told her that it was my money and those were my conditions, and she hung up. Now we are being harassed by her fiance's family. They aren't as fortunate as us, calling us assholes and a lot of other names, saying it's all gonna go to waste if she doesn't use it. We're setting her up for failure, etc. Now I'm wondering if I'm the asshole because my dad said we should give her the money as we saved it for her after all. So, am I?